My name is Sarah, and before all this happened, my life was pretty small. Not in a bad way, just simple. It was me and my daughter Maya. She's 7, with braids that bounce when she laughs and a gap in her front teeth that makes her smile. The most precious thing in the world. I worked 2 jobs to keep our little apartment, a roof over our heads and food on the table. I cleaned offices in the early morning, before the sun came up, and I worked the checkout at the local grocery store in the afternoon. It was tiring, but it was ours, our life. The whole thing started with something so stupid it's hard to believe. A traffic ticket. I was coming home from my cleaning job exhausted. The sun was just starting to paint the sky pink and orange. I was at that 4-way stop by the old mill, the one where the light has been flickering for months. It was blinking yellow, so I did what you're supposed to do. I slowed. I looked both ways, and when it was clear, I went. Next thing I know, blue and red lights are flashing in my rearview mirror. A police car. The officer was young, with a face that looked like he was still trying to grow into his uniform. He said I ran a red light. I tried to explain calmly that the light was broken, that it was blinking yellow, not red. He just shook his head, his eyes kind of glazing over like he wasn't really listening. He wrote the ticket. $300, $300. To some people, that might not be a lot. To me, it was groceries for a month. It was the difference between paying the electric bill on time or late. It was Maya's new pair of shoes for school. It was a mountain. My first instinct was just to pay it, to scrape the money together somehow and make it go away. That's what I usually did. I kept my head down. I didn't make trouble, but something about this felt different. It was just so wrong. I hadn't done it. It was a broken light and an officer who didn't want to listen. For the first time in a long time, a little spark of fight flickered inside me. I decided I was going to contest it. In court, my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sweet old woman who has lived in our town of Harmony Creek her whole life, tried to talk me out of it. We were sitting on her porch, drinking sweet tea. "Sarah, honey," she said, her voice soft and worried. "You know who the judge is in traffic court, don't you?" I shook my head. "No, ma'am, it's Judge Thompson. He's old school. Been on that bench for 40 years. He doesn't like to be questioned." She looked at me, her eyes full of meaning. "Especially not by folks like us." I knew what folks like us meant. It meant black folks. Harmony Creek wasn't a bad place to live, not on the surface. People smiled and said hello, but underneath, there were currents, old ideas, old prejudices, that ran deep like the creek the town was named after. You learn to navigate them, to stay in the safe parts of the water. Going to court to challenge. A police officer was wading into the deep end. "But I'm telling the truth, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. The light was broken. Truth doesn't always matter in that man's courtroom, child. What matters is who is telling it. Her words scared me. But that little spark of fight had grown into a small, stubborn fire. I was a good person. I worked hard. I paid my taxes. I was teaching my daughter to be honest and brave. How could I look her in the eye if I didn't stand up for myself when I was right? So I filled out the paperwork. I requested my day in court the night before. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I thought about what to wear. I didn't have a suit or a fancy dress. I picked out my nicest black slacks and a simple blue blouse, the one I wore for church on Easter. I made sure they were ironed perfectly. I wanted to look respectable. I wanted to be seen. The next morning, I dropped Maya off at school. I knelt down and held her little face in my hands. "Mommy has to go do something important today, sweetie," I told her. "I need you to be a good girl for your teacher. Are you scared, Mommy?" she asked, her big brown eyes searching mine. I forced a smile. A little bit. But we have to do things even when we're scared, right? She nodded seriously and gave me a tight hug. Be brave, Mommy. Her words were like a shield. I held onto them as I walked to the courthouse. The courthouse was an old, imposing brick building with tall white columns out front. It was designed to make you feel small. Inside, it smelled of old paper, floor polish, and a kind of stale authority. The courtroom itself was dark wood from floor to ceiling. Heavy red curtains blocked out the morning light. A big gold-framed seal of the state hung on the wall behind the judge's bench, right above a polished wooden chair that looked more like a throne. I sat on a hard wooden bench in the back, my purse clutched in my lap. My hands were clammy. The room slowly filled up with other people, all of us there for our little slices of trouble. I watched as case after case was called. Judge Thompson was an old man, probably in his late 70s. He had thin white hair combed over a spotted scalp and a face that seemed to be permanently set in a scowl. He moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. He ruled with a kind of weary, impatient cruelty. He'd sigh dramatically when people tried to explain themselves. He'd cut them off mid-sentence. He seemed to enjoy making people uncomfortable. I noticed a pattern. A young white man in a suit got a speeding ticket reduced to a warning with a wink and a drive safe, son. An older white woman who ran a stop sign got a small fine and a friendly chat about her garden. Then a young Hispanic man, a landscaper still in his work clothes, was called up for a broken taillight. The judge looked at him over his glasses. Can you even speak English? The judge asked, his voice dripping with disdain. The young man nodded nervously. Yes, sir, I do. Well, you could have fooled me. You people think you can just drive around in your junk heaps, putting everyone else at risk. He didn't let the man say another word. Guilty. Full fine. Plus court costs. The young man's shoulders slumped as he walked away. My heart started beating faster. Mrs. Gable's words echoed in my head. Truth doesn't always matter in that man's courtroom. Then, the bailiff called my name. Sarah Jones. My legs felt like jelly as I stood up. Every eye in the room turned to me. I walked down the center aisle, each footstep echoing on the polished floor. I stood before the bench, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from shaking. I kept my eyes fixed on the seal behind his head, just like I'd planned. Don't look him in the eye until you have to, so the judge said, looking down at my file. He took his time. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. He finally looked up, peering at me over his spectacles. You're Sarah Jones. He said my name wrong on purpose, stretching it out, making it sound foreign and strange. It's Sarah, Your Honor, I said, my voice quiet but clear. He ignored me. And you're here because you think you know better than Officer Miller. You think you're a traffic expert now? No, Your Honor, I said, my throat suddenly dry. I'm here because the traffic light at that intersection was malfunctioning. It was blinking yellow, not red. I proceeded with caution, as the law requires. He let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't a friendly sound. It was like a dog's bark. A few people in the front rows, men in suits who looked like they were his friends, snickered along with him. My face grew hot with shame. The light was malfunctioning, he repeated, mocking me. Is that your story? The little light just decided to stop working right when you got there. How convenient. He leaned forward, his elbows on the bench. Let me tell you something, girl. I've been sitting on this bench for 40 years. I've heard every excuse in the book. The sun was in my eyes. A bee flew in my car. My dog ate my driver's license. But the light was broken from someone like you. That's a new level of audacity. Someone like you. The words hung in the air. He didn't say black person. He didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew exactly what he meant. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't about a traffic ticket anymore. This was about him putting me in my place. I took a breath. I thought of Maya, Be brave, Mommy. Your Honor, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. With all due respect, I am telling the truth. The city has received complaints about that light before. It's a known issue. Is that so? He said, raising a bushy white eyebrow. Are you the mayor now too? You an engineer? What exactly is your occupation, Sarah? I'm a cleaner, Your Honor, and I work at a grocery store, I said, it with my head held high. There is no shame in honest work. But he smiled, a thin, cruel smile. A cleaner, of course. Well, maybe you should stick to scrubbing floors and leave the thinking to the rest of us. The words hit me like a slap. My eyes started to burn with tears, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I bit the inside of my cheek hard. The small, sharp pain helped me focus. I just stood there silent as he stared at me, enjoying my humiliation. He wasn't just talking to me. He was performing for the courtroom, for his friends, for the system he represented. He was showing them all how it worked. He was reminding everyone of the order of things in Harmony Creek. Let's hear from the officer, the judge said, waving a dismissive hand at me. Officer Miller came forward. He was the same young man who had given me the ticket. He looked uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet my eyes, officer, the judge said in a friendly, respectful tone. Tell me what you saw. Your Honor, I observed the defendant's vehicle proceed through a solid red light at the intersection of Mill and Main. A solid red light? You're sure it wasn't blinking yellow? The judge asked, with a sarcastic little lilt in his voice. No, sir. It was solid red. The officer was lying. I didn't know why. Maybe he was scared of the judge. Maybe he just didn't want to admit he was wrong. Maybe he really believed it. It didn't matter. His word against mine. And in this room, my word was worth nothing. There you have it, the judge said, slamming his hand down on the file. He turned his gaze back to me, and his eyes were cold and hard as stone. You come into my courtroom. You lie to my face. You waste this court's time. And you question the integrity of a police officer. Disgraceful. I opened my mouth to say something, anything. But my voice was gone. My throat was completely closed up. What could I say? He had already decided who I was the moment I walked in. I was just a prop in his little play. I find you guilty, he announced, his voice booming in the quiet room. And for your little performance here today, I'm doubling the fine. $600 plus $200 in court costs. That's $800. You have 30 days to pay. $800. The number was so huge, so impossible. It didn't even feel real. It was like he had sentenced me to a year in prison. My mind started racing. How would I ever pay that? I would lose our apartment. We would be on the street. All because of a broken traffic light and a man who hated the color of my skin. My legs started to tremble. The room felt like it was tilting. I felt dizzy, sick. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. A mixture of pity, scorn, and indifference. I felt naked, exposed, broken. The judge wasn't finished. He leaned back in his throne-like chair, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He was enjoying this. He wanted to savor his victory. And let this be a lesson to you, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. He pointed a long, bony finger at me. People like you need to learn your place. You think you can come in here and play games? You can't. This is my town, my courtroom. And in my courtroom, I am the law. He held my gaze, daring me to challenge him. I just stood there, frozen, my spirit completely crushed. I had tried to be brave, and this is where it got me. Humiliated and in debt I could never repay. Mrs. Gable was right. I was a fool to think truth mattered here. He picked up his gavel, ready to slam it down and seal my fate. He was the king in his castle, untouchable. And then, it happened. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. It wasn't a gentle push. They slammed against the walls with a bang that made everyone, including the judge, jump. 2 men stood in the doorway. They were not from Harmony Creek. They wore plain, dark suits that fit them perfectly. They had no expression on their faces. They carried an aura of power that was completely different from the judge's loud, bullying authority. It was quiet, calm, and absolute. The air in the room changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop. Behind them, 2 more men and a woman, also in suits, stepped in and quietly shut the doors. They moved with a silent, coordinated purpose that was unnerving. Judge Thompson was furious at the interruption. His face turned a blotchy red. What is the meaning of this? This is a court of law. Bailiff, remove these people. The bailiff, a burly man who had been smirking along with the judge, took a step forward. But he stopped when the first man in the suit held up a hand. The man didn't even look at the bailiff. His eyes were locked on Judge Thompson. He started walking down the center aisle, the same path I had just walked in shame. His footsteps were silent on the floor. The second man followed a few paces behind him. They moved past me, one on each side, without so much as a glance. They walked right up to the judge's bench, stopping just below him. They had to look up, but somehow they seemed taller. Judge Marcus Thompson, the first man said. His voice was calm and professional. It cut through the tension in the room like a knife. Who's asking? The judge blustered, trying to regain control. I'll have you held in contempt of court. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather wallet. He flipped it open. Special Agent Davies, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Special Agent Miller, FBI. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The word itself was like a thunderclap. The FBI was in Harmony Creek. In this courtroom, Judge Thompson's face went from red to a pale, sickly white. His jaw, which had been set in a confident scowl, went slack. He looked, for the first time that day, small. FF Federal. He stammered. Judge Marcus Thompson. Agent Davies said again, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. I have a federal warrant for your arrest. He held up a folded piece of paper. The judge stared at the paper as if it were a snake. Arrest? On what grounds? This is outrageous. This is a mistake. The charges include, Agent Davies said, not missing a beat, bribery, mail fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and multiple civil rights violations under color of law. Civil rights violations. My ears perked up. My head, which had been bowed in defeat, lifted. The judge just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The friends in the front row who had been laughing at me were now frozen, their faces masks of terror. The bailiff looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. You're joking, the judge whispered. The boom was gone from his voice. We don't joke, Judge Agent Davies said. He then looked at the bailiff. Step aside. The bailiff, who 5 minutes ago had been the judge's loyal dog, practically leaped out of the way. Agent Davies and Agent Miller walked up the 2 steps to the judge's sacred space behind the bench. It was like watching a sacred temple be desecrated. They stood on either side of him. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back, Agent Miller said. Judge Thompson didn't move. He was in shock. Agent Miller gently but firmly took his arm and pulled him to his feet. The judge, who had seemed like a giant just moments before, now looked like a frail, confused old man. They clicked handcuffs onto his wrists behind his back. The sound, a sharp metallic snick, echoed through the silent courtroom. It was the most surreal thing I had ever seen. The man who held absolute power, who had just tried to ruin my life for his own cruel amusement, was being arrested. In his own courtroom. In front of everyone, Agent Davies looked out at the stunned crowd. This courtroom is now a federal crime scene. Everyone will remain seated until you are dismissed. We will be taking statements. Then, his eyes landed on me. I was still standing where the judge had left me, in the middle of the floor, alone, figure in a sea of silent shock. Our eyes met. For a moment, I was scared again, but his expression wasn't hard or cold. It was neutral, professional. He walked back down the steps and approached me. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet. "Are you Sarah Jones?" I could only nod, my throat still tight. "My name is Agent Davies," he said again, as if to reintroduce himself in this new context. "We've been investigating Judge Thompson for over a year. A lot of people have been hurt by him." He paused, and his eyes softened just a little. "We've had this courtroom under surveillance for a while now. We've heard everything. Heard everything." He'd heard the mocking tone. He'd heard someone like you. He'd heard stick to scrubbing floors. He'd heard the lies and the cruelty. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined it. It was real. And someone had heard me. My knees finally gave out. I would have fallen if the other agent, the woman, hadn't been right there to gently take my arm and guide me to the front bench. She sat beside me. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're okay." And that's when the tears I had been holding back finally came. They weren't tears of shame or humiliation anymore. They were tears of pure, overwhelming relief. They streamed down my face, hot and fast. I didn't even try to stop them. I just sat there on that hard bench, next to an FBI agent, watching them lead the man who tried to break me out of his own courtroom in handcuffs, and I cried. They took my statement in a small, quiet room down the hall. I told them everything, from the moment I got the ticket to the final, crushing verdict. Agent Davies wrote it all down. He never once made me feel like I was stupid or lying. He just listened. When I was done, he looked at me. "Miss Jones," he said, using my proper name, "your testimony today is very important. What he did to you was a clear violation of your civil rights. It's the final piece of the puzzle we needed. It shows a pattern of bias and abuse that goes hand in hand with his financial corruption. Thank you for being brave enough to come here today." Brave. My word. I hadn't felt brave. I had felt terrified and small. But maybe, just maybe, they were the same thing. They told me my ticket and the fines were dismissed, erased. Like they never happened. When I finally walked out of the courthouse, the world looked different. The sun was high in the sky, bright and warm. The air felt lighter, cleaner. The people on the street, the ones who had been in the courtroom, looked at me differently. Not with pity, but with a kind of awe. I walked past Mrs. Gable's house. On my way to the school, she was on her porch, and when she saw me, she stood up and started to clap. Just a slow, steady clap. The best moment of all was picking up Maya from school. She ran to me and wrapped her arms around my legs. "Did you do the important thing, Mommy?" she asked, looking up at me. I knelt down and pulled her into the biggest hug of her life. I buried my face in her hair, breathing in the sweet smell of playground and kid shampoo. "Yes, sweetie," I whispered into her ear, my voice thick with emotion. "Mommy did the important thing, and everything is going to be okay." That night, the news was all over TV. Longtime Harmony Creek judge arrested by FBI on corruption charges. They showed a picture of Judge Thompson, looking old and defeated. They talked about a long investigation into bribes from wealthy defendants and kickbacks from lawyers. And then, the reporter said, the investigation reportedly culminated after the judge displayed shocking racial bias and abuse of power against a local woman in open court. They didn't use my name, and I was grateful for that. But I knew, everyone in town knew, my life didn't magically become easy. I still had 2 jobs. I still had bills to pay. I was still just Sarah, a single mom trying to make it. But something inside me had changed. That little spark of fight, the one that Judge Thompson had tried so hard to stomp out, was now a steady flame. I had found my voice, not by shouting, but by simply refusing to be silenced. I had stood in the face of injustice, and even though I thought I had been broken, I had been heard. I had learned that my truth, the truth of a simple cleaning woman, did matter. And I had a story to tell my daughter, not about a racist judge, but about how even when you feel small and powerless, you have to stand up, speak your truth, and be brave, because you never know who might be listening.